Welcome to Unit 7, Lesson 3. Today we're going to be talking about the heart and cardiovascular health. And in part 1 of the video, which is mandatory, we're going to look at the external and internal features of the heart. And then in class, or part 2 of the video, which is optional, we're going to look at how blood flows through the heart, and we're going to explain how the heart beats, and explain what an ECG is, as well as identify some key cardiovascular health concerns. So to begin with, there's a very important note when we're looking at diagrams of the heart, and that is that all anatomical drawings are drawn from the perspective of the body or / cadaver looking up at you from the page. This is really important because it means the reader's left is really the diagram's right. So right and left are switched when you're looking at diagrams of the heart. So what appears to be on your right hand side represents the left of the heart. Equals heart's left. And that shouldn't be too hard to remember because I wouldn't have made a big deal about it if it was normal, so obviously it has to be reversed. So now we're going to look at the key features, external features of the heart. And we'll start here with this portion, which is the aorta. And the aorta wraps around and actually continues down out the bottom of the heart. So it wraps around and continues below the heart. So this is called the aorta, and it's high O2 to body. So it's carrying high O2 blood to the body. Branching off of that, up here, this one's going to your head, and this is your left carotid artery, which is high O2 to head. Just below it, heading off to your arm, if you remember last day, goes below the clavicle. This is your left subclavian artery, just sending high O2 to arm. Now coming up and out of here, is your left pulmonary artery, which is low O2 blood going to lungs. On the other side, you have the right pulmonary artery, which is low O2 blood to lungs as well. But remember, you have a right and a left lung. The base here, where it branches off from, well, if you think about a tree, the branches come off the trunk. It's called the pulmonary trunk. These two vessels here are actually bringing blood back from the lungs. As are these two vessels, which come in behind the heart. So they're called the left pulmonary vein. Veins bring things back to the lungs, or sorry, back to the heart. And this is going to be high O2 to heart. And again, on this side, it's the right pulmonary vein bringing it back to the heart. And because it's coming back from the lungs, it's going to be high O2 to heart. And then coming up from the bottom, collecting the body back, or sorry, the blood back from the body, and down from the top, collecting blood back from the heart. We discussed it last day. From the bottom, it's the inferior vena cava, and from the head, the superior vena cava. And then, the last important detail from the external part. The heart and muscle tissue of the heart is so thick that even though the heart is filled with blood, the nutrients, oxygen, and glucose can't actually diffuse directly from the blood on the inside of the heart to the muscle tissue on the outside of the heart. So hearts have to be fed by what's called the cardiac arteries. Which carry high O2 blood to heart muscle. And when you have a heart attack, it's often because you've damaged the heart muscle, because these cardiac arteries are actually blocked and the blood can't get to the muscle tissue to supply it, and the muscle tissue actually dies. Now, not only do you have to bring nutrients and O2 to it, you also have to take away waste CO2 from it. So these would be your cardiac veins. That take low O2 from muscle to heart chambers to be pumped to the lung. Okay, so those are the key external features of the heart. Now we want to look at the internal anatomy of the heart. There's going to be some overlap here. Once again, we want to remember this is the right side of the heart, whereas this is the left side of the heart. And we'll start again with the aorta. I'm not going to remind you of the function. We've talked about it last day and now just above. Here is your pulmonary trunk. Which branches into a right and left pulmonary artery. Again, not going to repeat what their functions are. But now we're going to look more at the internal features. Again, we talked about these two. They're bringing blood back to the heart from the lungs, so those are pulmonary veins. But this here, internal structure, is the left atrium. And we're going to talk about how blood flows through these various chambers. It will come in from the lungs, oxygenated, into the left atrium. It will then be pushed through this area here, which is a valve. It's called the atrioventricular valve. And it's called that because it's between the atrium and the ventricle, so it's called the AV valve for short. And the blood will flow through that valve, and now it can't go back into the atrium once it's through the valve, down into this chamber here, which has a V shape, which makes it easy to remember what the chamber's called. Look at the V shape. It's called the left ventricle. And the blood from the left and the right of the heart is separated due to this tissue here. It divides the left and the right. Blood cannot travel directly from left to right. It must pass through the lungs first. And this here is called the septum. And it separates left versus right of the heart. When the blood is pumped out of the ventricle, it's going to come up to this structure here and on out the path. I'll show you in red. The path comes up here through another valve and on out, crosses in behind the aorta. And that valve, sometimes it's called the aorta valve, but more often it's called a semilunar valve. Okay, so it's where you see the little three things right here. That's your semilunar valve. Okay. If we proceed around to the right side, on the right side of the heart, we have the right ventricle. Above it, we have the right atrium. The right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from the body, and it's going to move it into the right ventricle and then on out to the lungs. When it goes to go out the lungs, it has to go through this valve again. Whoops, we missed this valve first. So it goes from the atrium into the ventricle, again via what's called the AV valve, atrioventricular valve. So there's one on each side of the heart. And up here, when it goes to exit out to the pulmonary trunk, it also has what's called the pulmonary valve, or, once again, the semilunar valve. And then if we look down at the bottom here, this is just the aorta continuing, it's wrapped around. And this here is the inferior vena cava, which would make this one from above the what? That's correct. Superior vena cava. And again, this is going to be the right pulmonary artery. And these two here together would be the right, sneak it in here, pulmonary vein. Okay, so those are the key internal features of the heart. Really what we're focusing on is right atrium, blood flowing through the AV valve into the right ventricle. Blood flows out of the right ventricle through the semilunar valve to the lungs, back from the lungs into the left atrium, down into the left ventricle through the AV valve, back out through the semilunar valve to the aorta and to the body. And one interesting thing is, if you see a well-drawn picture of a heart, a correctly drawn picture of the heart, you will often notice that the left ventricle muscle is thicker as it must pump to the body. Which is a harder thing to do than if you're just pumping straight to the lungs. So the right will be thinner because it doesn't have to pump as far, so the muscle's not as developed. Okay. Picture looks a little messy. I hope it turned out in your diagram. You can very easily simplify your pictures. Draw them like this. Draw your little valves. Put your septum in. You're going to have vessels coming out. Little valves. You can quite easily simplify and draw. Next day, we are going to draw this. I do have a pre-made picture here in case you're missing class, but if you're in class, we will draw this picture from scratch with a pencil. Otherwise, if you have any questions, I'm just going to delete this, it's not very nice. If you have any questions, come see me and I will hopefully help you out. Otherwise, have a good day and I'll see you in class.